Okay, I think we're ready to go. Everyone can hear me? Thank you, everybody, for coming to this session. I know there's a lot of good things else on here at the conference you could be attending, and there's also the delights of Olympia at lunchtime, so I do appreciate you sparing some time with us. So my name is Matthew Aslett, or Matt Aslett, more formally known as. I'm the Research Director for Data Platforms and Analytics at 451 Research, so I'm going to talk for the next half an hour or so about our view of the future of big data, machine learning, and the Internet of Things, which we are calling pervasive intelligence. For those of you who don't know 451 Research, so we are an IT research and advisory company, so I'm an industry analyst, but don't hold that against me. We've got about 250 employees spread across the globe, around 2,000 clients, which is predominantly technology and service providers, but also corporate advisory and finance, professional services, and IT decision makers. The last thing I'll point to on this slide, perhaps the most important, 85,000 plus IT professionals and business users and consumers within our 451 Alliance research community. So these are not necessarily people who are direct customers of 451 Research, although many of them work for organizations that are, but they are people, practitioners out there in the field working with technology as part of their daily work lives, and also their, using technology in their home lives, and obviously increasingly those things overlapping for good or bad. And they work with us doing surveys and answering interviews, and in return for doing that, have free access to our research. So if that's something that you might be interested in, come and see me, or I'll have our contact details later. We're always trying to grow that group, and especially we're trying to grow it right now with people who are interested in data and analytics. So anybody very welcome. So the way in which we work within 451 Research, we have different industry-focused teams. And so I'm the research director for the data platforms and analytics team. You can see right there in the middle. We call these channels. And you can say, we kind of go from the core to the edge, from the data center and critical infrastructure out to customer experience, commerce, and the Internet of Things. And one thing we've tried to do over the years is make sure we don't get siloed. We don't only focus on our areas. So there is a lot of collaboration across these groups. We work very closely with my team with the customer experience and commerce, workforce productivity and compliance, down into sort of security and storage, but also clearly the Internet of Things, which leads us onto kind of the topic of pervasive intelligence. And this is one of 4 themes that we're introducing in our research. This is something we've not done before. This is us kind of growing up a bit as a research organization, as well as continuing to look at the industry from these different sort of lenses, if you like. We're also, through a program that we're calling Foresight, looking at, as I say, thematic research. So looking at the industry in terms of 4 key areas, which are contextual experience, universal risk, invisible infrastructure, and pervasive intelligence. So I'm going to focus primarily on pervasive intelligence today, because clearly it's the area that I've been most involved with, and it's the area that's most relevant to this event. So what is pervasive intelligence? So from our perspective, it describes the increased use of data and analytics, not just to drive business decisions, which of course people are doing today with business intelligence, but actually the core operational applications of the business itself. So people talk about, we've heard a lot at this event about becoming data-driven. We would say that pervasive intelligence is the theme, which is driving organizations to become more data-driven. It's the infusion of both human and artificial intelligence into applications and systems, workflows, services, devices, and the entire computing system infrastructure, whether that's on the cloud or in premises, on the data center or at the edge. And basically what that's delivering is the democratization of data-driven decision-making. I'm not sure if you can see these slides. The sun coming out, sort of ruining it for everyone. Who needs that? So there's 3, obviously, core elements that we see within pervasive intelligence. Those are big data, IoT, and artificial intelligence. And obviously, we could give several presentations on each of these. But just to run through them quickly and to sort of give a sense of how, obviously, we think they relate to each other, starting with big data. again, I could give multiple presentations about big data, and spoke about big data at this event last year, and about how our view of big data is focused on the economics of storing and processing data, and really has its roots in this quote from George Dyson, who talked about big data being what happened when the cost of keeping information became less than the cost of throwing it away. Now, you can argue about whether that's absolutely fundamentally true in every case, but this really gets to the essence for us of what is different about what's happening now compared to what has happened in the past in terms of enabling organizations to store and process large volumes of data to the extent they've never been able to do before, which is a core enabler, therefore, for the Internet of Things and artificial intelligence. And Emma talked about this morning, but it's, it's this economic change we see as the primary spark that's driven the fundamental change that's happening today. In terms of, some key areas to think about, obviously the data lake is a key area of focus for a lot of organizations. We've seen this grow in the last couple of years. It's, clearly it's not in every sense that organizations are doing this, but it's this, the economics of storing and processing data enables organizations to put, theoretically at least, all their raw data in one place and enable access to that from multiple groups within an organization for multiple purposes. Now, clearly, the data lake is only as valuable to some extent as the data that's in there, and in order to keep that refreshed, you need to continue to update the data within that. Hence, we see, obviously, a growing interest, and we've, I've been at 451 for 10 years. Within that time, been looking at complex event processing, event stream processing, and now we're talking just about stream processing, all those other things being part of this. And the move to real-time analytics and the need to constantly refresh, whether your data's in a lake or we talk about continuous data integration as well. The organization operating in real time on a constantly updated stream of data. Beyond sort of the data storage and processing, one of the other key shifts we see is the way in which organizations are actually accessing that data. And this is one of the key things that we saw in terms of big data. And again, I talked about this last year, that it's not just about how much data you have or how varied it is or how fast it's produced, but the way in which organizations want to engage with their data. And predominantly, we see that being done through self-service. And that's impacting organizations in a number of ways. We think about how the IT department, the balance between sort of the IT department and business users in the past, it's been very much business intelligence driven by the IT department preparing reports and dashboards for decision makers. And we move then into sort of user-driven self-service visualization, particularly for data analysts and also some business users. And also, clearly for data scientists, there's a lot more autonomy there in terms of user-driven statistical modeling, predictive analytics and descriptive analytics into the age of automation and automating decision-making through machine learning models, and then into actually intelligent-driven applications where the results of the intelligence are delivered to the end users, which could be the employees, the workforce, could be partners, of course, or it could be consumers, in terms of the applications, the way in which they engage with the organization. And they may not even be aware that what they're viewing is the result of an analytic process, but increasingly, of course, it is, and increasingly that's being used to actually influence the behavior of end users, hopefully, obviously, in a good way. And another way of looking at that is sort of the democratization of data within an organization. So, if we think about, traditionally, data has come from enterprise applications into a data warehouse being made available to, as we said, IT professionals, decision makers, and data analysts. We've seen this massive expansion now in terms of not just the multiple data sources, including mobile applications, IoT devices and sensors, social media, etc., but also the way in which that data is stored and processed. So Hadoop, obviously, cloud storage, Spark, and then obviously, as I said, the way in which the data is processed, the rise of artificial intelligence, machine learning, and the groups of users that are actually taking advantage of that data. In particular, as we say, data-driven applications and business users. Now, this agility is very advantageous. We saw in the survey results yesterday, I think it was really interesting, that self-service data preparation was, I think, the #2 technology that enterprises were looking to take advantage of looking forward. But #1 was good old enterprise information management. And there was a talk on the panel yesterday about the need for good data governance as a solid foundation for organizations taking advantage of this opportunity for additional value through big data analytics. And that's something we've seen, if you think about if the data lake was somewhere that you could put all your data in a single place to take advantage of, the way that you actually get value out of that is through two things we see, which are actually fundamental to making the data lake a reality, which are self-service analytics to get the data out, but also good data governance to know what data you have in there in the first place, and to understand how it's being used, what the lineage is, what your regulatory requirements are. And without that balance between sort of self-service agility and underlying good data governance, I think, the data lake, effectively ends up becoming the data swamp. Now, we think that this combination of things takes us actually beyond what was initially described as a data lake. The initial description of the data lake is actually very simplistic, and there isn't a lot of detail in there in terms of what technology you use, how you get at that data, how you manage that data. It's simply a place to put all your data. And we see a lot of organizations talking about enabling data as a service or an internal data marketplace. There's some scope for confusion there because obviously we see cloud services delivering data as a service or data marketplaces. So we've started kind of tentatively using the term data bazaar. But the point here is this is somewhere within an enterprise that data consumers and data producers and data owners can all come together and share that data, make it available, collaborate around data. Clearly, as I said, this has to have sort of good, solid governance underpinnings. And I think, in a way, that if we think about, a data bazaar or a souk, it appears it's, kind of chaotic, but actually there's some good, solid rules underneath that in terms of where particular products can be bought and sold, obviously in terms of prices and generating taxes and collecting those. So there's a solid sort of framework that underpins this, but enables a great sort of agility and a very sort of agile and lively place where organizations can, as I say, can collaborate and share. So beyond that, very briefly, and as I say, we go into a lot more detail on all of those elements, but beyond big data, IoT is perhaps, the next, the second of the three foundational elements. And again, we could go into a whole other separate presentation on this. As I said, we've got the colleagues who focus specifically on IoT. But what we see there is, I think, with the Internet of Things, it's very easy to focus on a few use cases. And when we were putting together this report around pervasive intelligence, we kept going back to sort of autonomous vehicles to the point where we actually sort of banned anybody from using the terms autonomous vehicles anymore. Because there are a huge number of opportunities and applications and use cases for the Internet of Things. And we actually see this as being a core element in the move towards digital transformation and impacting business and consumers and governments and industries. And this is deliberately an eye chart that one of my colleagues put together, looking at some of the key industry sectors in which we see the Internet of Things being valuable, and then the use cases in those industry sectors. And obviously, I wouldn't bother taking a photo. You're not going to be able to see that. But we are sharing these slides, and we can share this particularly so you can get a good view of what those use cases are. But the point here is that this isn't just something that's going to impact a couple of sectors. It is going to impact the society as a whole. And from my perspective, as I said, I've got, my colleagues are focused on the Internet of Things, in and of itself. My interest there is in data as it relates to Internet of Things. And we talk sometimes about the data management of things and how is the Internet of Things actually going to change how we store and process and analyze data. And the key element, as far as I can see from combined research, is actually latency, and latency having an impact on where that data is stored and processed related to the particular device and therefore obviously the use case. And that's where we see, fundamental decisions being taken in terms of whether data is stored and processed, on the device, at a data center or on the cloud, or obviously increasingly at the edge. Again, as I say, there's a lot more we go into here, but in the interest of time, I'll move on to artificial intelligence. Now, I would agree with what Amma said this morning, that artificial intelligence, as it's currently being used, is not really the right term, but it's the term that everyone's using, so we have to go with that. I would argue actually a lot of what we're seeing isn't intelligent at all at the moment, but what it is a kind of organizations trying to build software that runs on machines that can think, or at least sort of act like humans in some way. And then obviously within that, we see machine learning as a subset of artificial intelligence focused on using algorithms that specifically can learn, whether supervised or unsupervised, and improve without necessarily being explicitly programmed to do so. And then also deep learning as a subset of machine learning, as a subset of AI, based on specific algorithms that attempt to mimic the human brain in the form of multi-layered neural networks. And again, I'd agree with Ammar's presentation this morning in the keynote when he talked about really the important thing here is not, artificial intelligence is a bit misleading in some ways. Really, this is about automation. We think about this in terms of automation in three key areas when we look at the core technologies that are being adopted. One of those is industrial automation. So systems, automation of control systems via robots, warehouse operations, smart vehicles, smart factories, intelligent operations, et cetera, et cetera. The second, we're calling at the moment perception automation. It's maybe not quite the right phrase, but basically, replicating human perception, cognition, and communication. So things like speech recognition, natural language processing, and generation, image, facial recognition, behavioral analysis. And thirdly, engagement automation. So here we're talking about AI specifically being used to drive, say, commercial initiatives. It's not to say the other two aren't commercial, but we're talking here often about customer engagement through things like virtual assistants and chatbots, segmentation, recommendations, churn prediction, likelihood to purchase, etc. And if we add on, so this is a combination of kind of technologies, but also use cases, and the way we see them being, fanning out across this spectrum. The important thing, though, of course, is that in any individual application or workload or use case, it will almost definitely rely on a combination of technologies. So if we see, particularly obviously, chatbots will rely on speech recognition or recommendation engines. From industrial automation with logistics, there's going to be particularly perhaps some geographic understanding and speech and language and image recognition capabilities along there as well. So this is a combination, it is a spectrum, and the use cases take advantage of technologies that apply across this, across the board here. So these are the three, as I said, foundational elements of what we're calling pervasive intelligence. But they're by no means the only ones. And I think this is the important point here. If it was just about how these three things fit together, that would be interesting enough. But if we see, emerging technologies like blockchain, things like digital twins, and also how this pervasive intelligence fits in with the other three themes that we have within Foresight. So things like risk, invisible infrastructure, and contextual experience. And another key element here, obviously, is ethics. So these are the elements that we're talking about within pervasive intelligence. Probably more interesting, though, is the implications and the trends that we see being driven from that. So within this report, we've focused on 5 key trends that we see that are being driven by pervasive intelligence. And we've got a number of sort of implications being driven by them in terms of short-term, medium, and long-term. And I just picked out one for each here for each of these 5. There's actually many, many more in the report. But if you think about this in terms of the primary sort of trend we see is the convergence of these 3 foundational elements. How they are converging together to produce changes in the way in organizations go about their business. And so, if we see, in terms of the medium term, cutting edge innovation here in terms of things like voice interfaces, virtual reality, augmented reality, and mixed reality becoming something that's part of, so we're talking medium term, sort of 5 to 10 years, part of the way that most organizations are, if not running their business, but it is an aspect that is part of their business. We talk about data and computation. So this is really, if we think about pervasive intelligence doesn't clearly exist in isolation, there is the need, it is enabled by the ability to store and process enormous volumes of data, which obviously is where the cloud and invisible infrastructure comes into play. But also, as we talked about, the interfaces between the user and the application itself, which is what contextual experience is actually all about. And this is also an area where we see some of the other technologies coming into play. So we talk about things like blockchain, enabling complex ecosystems to exchange data and value between seamless exchanges. The third key trend we see is about data as the ultimate asset. It's actually got a lot longer name, which wouldn't fit on the slide, so I had to shorten it. But here we're talking about the change that we anticipate seeing within the industry itself being fundamental over the next few years. There's a lot of vendors here, a lot of new vendors here. There's also some, some incumbent vendors here. What we're seeing is that this is going to really radically change the landscape in terms of some of those incumbent vendors will remain, but within sort of 5 to 10 years, their portfolio of products, at least those that they're going out and selling as new products, new projects, rather than just the maintenance streams, are likely to be radically different. And the three elements of pervasive intelligence, we already see are fundamental drivers of M&A activity within the industry already. I think when you combine those together, this is going to have a really significant potential to drive change over the next 5 to 10 years. Sweeping social implications, and this is where one of the things we're doing in this report is we as an organization have always focused very much on the technology itself, even to a lesser extent how it's used, but we're increasingly doing that. Here we're looking beyond even that, beyond the enterprise, at society itself and how it will be impacted by the rise of pervasive intelligence. And clearly we see, there are some benefits that are to be had in terms of changing how we live, work, transact, and travel. Just to pick out a couple of examples, lower transportation and communication costs, improved vendor responsiveness to consumer behavior, hopefully, and improved access to information just from society as a whole. On the flip side of that, obviously there are some very real risks involved in pervasive intelligence and the technologies being rolled out. We do see, some of those have been talked about at this event. I talked about ethics being one particular thing that is a fundamental part of what we're looking at here. And one of the, in particular, we're looking at sort of the potential for inequality between the data rich and the data poor, and that potentially happening at many different levels, sort of a geographic level, political level, at a business level, and on an individual level. And in particular, the potential for a few sort of platform-orientated companies to control the interaction between buyers, sellers, and third parties. And that was something I wanted to dwell on a little bit, because it's something that I've been thinking about a lot, and it's actually in relation to sort of the graphics you see at this event, or they've become slightly less Soviet this year, I noticed. But in any case, I found myself putting together this report actually sort of paraphrasing Marx, which wasn't something I necessarily expected to do. But if you think about the way in which we have a small number of organizations that increasingly, potentially at this stage, control the elements of generating value from data. If we think about how organizations generate that value from data, you have to have the data itself, obviously, and lots of it. You have to have the algorithms in which to run against that data. You have to have the skills, the people, to understand those algorithms and to generate value from that data. And you have to have the computing resources to store and process all that data. And increasingly, we see Amazon, Google, Microsoft, maybe a few others, Facebook, maybe, IBM, maybe, Oracle, who knows. But having the ability to control the data, the subjects of that labor, the instruments of the labor, in terms of the algorithms. Even though the algorithms are very often open source and freely available, and the tools to take advantage of those are freely available, you need the cloud services to process all that data. Where is that going to come from? It's going to come from Amazon or Google or Microsoft. And who owns the majority of the skilled data scientists that there are on this planet right now? Who employs, owns is the wrong word, employs the majority? It's Google and Amazon and Microsoft. And, you know, I don't want to scare anyone yet. We're not yet at the stage of having, you know, a single company. Has anyone seen or read The Circle? We're clearly not there yet. But, you know, we should be thinking about this. We should be thinking about the way in which we are, as an industry, enabling a small number of companies to actually potentially control the resources that are available and the data that we share with them, that they take advantage of, and they deliver us great value. So we're happy to do that. It's very convenient for us to do that in many cases, but we should be, you know, we should be cognizant of that. And that is something we are in this report thinking about. And it's something we're going to be thinking about going forward, because it ties into this quote, which I've said a lot, and my colleagues have said a lot, and you may have seen this before. Those who own the data will win. Everyone else will have to pay for access to that. You know, in some ways, we see a lot of, especially organizations that aren't in this room and aren't really thinking about how they take advantage of these trends, they are going to be on the wrong side of this equation. And clearly what we see right now in terms of digital transformation, in terms of IoT and AI and big data, is organizations that trying to figure out how they get on the right side of this equation. And this is fundamentally really, I think, what pervasive intelligence is all about. So as I said, pervasive intelligence is just one element of this report. The others, contextual experience, universal risk, and visible infrastructure. I was hoping, we were planning that we would have finished this by now. It's not just IT projects that get delayed. It should be finished later today, which is great timing for me in terms of talking about it. But it will be available very, very soon. Our plan is to make it freely available to anybody, whether they're a 451 client or not. So look out for details of that. You know, the easiest way to find that would be to follow me or follow 451 Research on Twitter. As I say, it is going to be freely available. There's an enormous amount more in the report than I was able to go into today. This is the first page of the pervasive intelligence sector. You see, one of the things we have here is a radar looking at the different technologies and when we think they might start to have a significant impact. And also in here, we have a maturity model looking at the different enterprises in terms of things like both the technology they're using, but also the culture internally and the organizational elements. And you know, so you can start to think about where perhaps your organization is relative to others in terms of moving towards becoming, you know, pervasively intelligent. So again, I want to thank you very much for your time being here today. I really appreciate it. And hopefully that was of some value, or at least got people thinking. And yeah, please do look out for the report. Hopefully there will be much more value in that. And yeah, look forward to continuing this conversation. So thank you very much.